Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today we're going to continue the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and I have the next in the installment of Would It Work on MiSTer FPGA, because you guys seem to love these videos going into tech deep dives on different arcade boards and deciding whether or not they would function on MiSTer. So today we're taking a look at the Konami GX, which has an absolute metric ton of some of Konami's best 2D games of all time in my opinion, and also a few stinkers as well, so we're going to see whether or not it would work. Before we get too far involved, though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But the Konami GX is host to a whole ton of games, including Sexy Proteus, one of the most hilarious and fun shmups on Konami's hardware in my opinion. So what we're going to do is go over the hardware, all of its variants, and talk about whether or not it would work on MiSTer FPGA and how hard it would be to actually get a core going, because this is a situation in which I do think it would work, but it would be an absolute mess of hardware to try to deal with it. But let's get into talking about arcade hardware in general, just so you understand how much different it is than home console hardware. Now this is not a GX board, it is the first 3D board after the GX, but Konami arcade hardware always had variants. It's not like a home console where you take a Super Nintendo and it's always a Super Nintendo, even if they went to the one-chip design. A lot of times, all of Konami's arcade boards could have additional PCBs that would expand the capabilities of the game. So something like Sexy Proteus may not need an expansion board, but other games may need a completely different board to get the full functionality out of the game. Konami GX is messy like that, with a total of 4 different optional boards that would have to be strung together in FPGA to get all of the games working. So it's kind of a situation in which it would be a metric ton of actual coding. If we take a look at the actual Konami GX hardware here, you're going to see that it is relatively simple, and if we go down to the sound and main CPU side of things, we have a Motorola 68020 and 68000, two chips that are definitely very well known to MiSTer FPGA developers. The 68020 is definitely the more powerful of the two, but we have that already on the Amiga side of things within a core, so both the 68020 as well as the 68000 are well-trod territory when it comes to FPGA implementations, and there's multiple options to be able to use that code within a Konami GX core. But that's the thing, arcade games don't just run on CPUs, they have a ton of custom display hardware as well. Konami had so many different internal design chips, so they could do different things with sprites and background layers, scrolling, even some pseudo 3D effects in the time frame of the GX, even if it is a pure 2D board. So there is a lot of custom hardware on here. Additionally, there are 2 different revisions of the motherboard. They are interchangeable. I checked with a few people I know and they said that was totally doable, but you do need to pick which one you're going to actually reproduce. I would probably imagine they'd go with the secondary board because it has 1 fewer custom chips, so it would be 1 less chip to actually lay up in the silicon. You'll see the difference right here in that list. So that is the first thing. You need to get a hold of a GX motherboard and you need to decide which one you want to implement. The less chips, the better as far as the logic footprint is concerned, but that combined chip may actually have a little bit harder complexity on it because it is doing 2 things at once versus being 2 separate chips in the original motherboard design. But honestly, playing something like Salamander 2 on MiSTer FPGA would be an absolute dream, so I do hope and anticipate that this thing is going to actually come to MiSTer FPGA and FPGA boards in general sometime in the future. I don't really have any information on anybody currently working on it, but it feels like such a big target because you get so many incredible games out of this entire setup. And you can see here just how much of a powerhouse it was at pushing 2D and huge sprites on screen, even having some rotation and scaling on the sprites as well. As your ship goes from horizontal to vertical layout, it does scale and then shrink back down. So there is a lot of 2D custom hardware on here to handle all of those things. So that would all need to be strung together within the FPGA core to actually be able to function with all of the different games and their graphical capabilities. And that's the interesting thing, even the sound chip was made more concise on the second revision. It's a 1 smaller chip design versus the original motherboard. So I would again presume that any core developer would want to take a look at the second revision because it would contain less silicon, therefore require less reverse engineering as far as custom chips are concerned if people decap them. And if you're wondering what the GX hardware sounded like, I'll give you a sound sample so you understand what the target would be, and I'll come back and talk about the specialized video boards. Not only could Konami make awesome soundtrack elements, but they also had some incredible sound hardware on this board as well. So that is definitely something that would need to be taken a look at, but it should 100% fit within the logic of MiSTer FPGA, along with the rest of the board. And this board is a situation in which the actual chips on it aren't that complex as far as other things that have been done on MiSTer FPGA before. But the reality is there are 4 different type of optional boards, all 4 of which would have to be reverse engineered and researched before every single game would run on something like a MiSTer FPGA core. This is going to be expensive and it's going to be time consuming. As you see, you have type 1, 2, 3, and 4 down there, and they're all going to have different functionalities, and they would all have to be implemented to have 100% of the games playable. Type 4 is the most interesting. Running Gun 2 here is a 2D basketball game that has some very nice looking pseudo 3D elements, and this is how the game would normally run with a dual screen setup, so you could have 2 different players playing at the same time. When you're playing against the CPU, you just get this subtract screen on the right, and I will definitely just zoom in and make it a single screen. But to get a game like this playable on MiSTer FPGA, you would have to get access to the Type 4 board to reverse engineer it so you had that dual video output. You'd also have to lay the core up to have 2 independent video views at the same time, or even do something like having HDMI out in one instance and analog out in the second to have 2 different monitors working, which I would actually love to see happen on MiSTer FPGA at some point, just out of a curiosity standpoint. But this is a lot of work for one single game that I would say is mid at best. So that is the reality of the GX. You have Type 1, which has analog controls. You have Type 2, which is the standard board. You have Type 3, which has a different 3D ground chip. And you have Type 4, which has the dual monitor output. All 4 of these boards, including the 2 main boards on the GX, would have to be 100% replicated. And while again this is not a GX board, it's actually a Cobra, Konami loved adding boards to their PCBs, putting the GPU onto one of the CPU boards here. There's a connector in the front that could be used for a network board as well that only one game used. So Konami loved doing this thing. Additionally, you would have to implement light gun as well, because something like Lethal Enforcers 2 here is a light gun game. I am playing it in MAME because it's not one of the arcade boards actually in my collection. But that's the other thing that you need to deal with. We don't really have many light gun games on the arcade side for MiSTer FPGA, but we do have the ability to use GunCon 1, 2, and 3, as well as Gun for IR and now even Sinden, to be able to play these type of games. And I do hope more light gun games come to MiSTer FPGA in the future. But tell me down below, if you're going to get one light gun game on the system, which one would you want? For me, Lethal Enforcers 2 definitely wouldn't be at the top of the list. The other thing is, for as many good games as there are on the Konami GX, there's also some absolute stinkers like Dragoon Might here. Konami tried to really make it big in the 2D fighting game arena to take on Capcom and SNK, but they never really cracked the code. So something like this game here would be a curiosity to play on MiSTer FPGA, but compared to something like Salamander 2 or Sexy Parodius, not the type of game that many people are hankering to actually take a look at. So the Konami GX is definitely a doable situation on MiSTer FPGA. It would just require an absolute ton of work, because you need to get a hold of the motherboard and the ROM board, and you need to decide which version of the motherboard you want to reverse engineer. You need to deal with all of the custom graphics chips as well as the sound processors, and additionally you need access to all 4 of the add-on boards and reverse engineer all of those and get them into an FPGA core so that every single game is playable. This is totally doable. It's just a metric crap ton of work, and it's going to be expensive because those boards aren't cheap. So could Konami GX work on MiSTer FPGA? Should be fine. Is it going to work anytime soon? I don't know. See you guys next time. Bye bye.